Did you get that?
Did you get that?
Did you get that?
Welcome to Mission Forward.
Hi there, and welcome to the Mission Forward podcast, where each week we bring you a thought-provoking and perspective-shifting conversation on the power of communication. I'm Carrie Fox, your host and CEO of Mission Partners, a social impact communications firm and certified B Corporation. And today I have such a good conversation to share with you. On today's show, we have the very thoughtful and purpose-driven associate partner of Edgility Consulting, Jonathan Howard. Jonathan's here to talk with us about equitable hiring practices, and this is a conversation you are really going to enjoy. A bit first, though, about today's guest. So Jonathan defines himself as a recruiter at his core, though his background includes having been a teacher at Teach for America, a VP of recruitment at a charter school, and now a recruiter with Edgility Consulting. And part of his purpose, which you will learn more about today, is to connect with and find great people to fill critical roles that push organizations forward. And as you hear, he is particularly passionate about supporting people of color and people whose identity has been marginalized historically to move into and ultimately thrive in leadership positions in organizations that aspire to their values. This is what I think so many of you listening right now to this show want too. But as I often hear, there are too many things that hold that thriving part back in organizations. So listen in as we get into equitable hiring practices with Jonathan Howard, and I suspect much of this will resonate deeply with you. Jonathan, we've got a lot to get to, so let's get to it. Welcome to Mission Forward.
Thanks, Carrie. Thanks for having me. Really excited to speak with you today.
And I'm excited to have you here. So pick up on the story a little bit. Tell me a little bit more about you and your story and what brought you to this recruiting work.
Yeah, so, to make a long story short, I grew up in Phoenix. Was raised by a single mom who was raising three boys. I should include my mom was white, and she was raising three black boys, which I like to share because I think it's absolutely sort of defined how I think about DEI, just about equity and how I engage with the world. My early life identity really came from being an athlete, right? So I played basketball, was a pretty good basketball player as a youngster, ended up getting a basketball scholarship to ASU. Basketball career didn't quite go the way I wanted it to, like a lot of young kids hope. But I had a good mom and a good support structure in place that was really pushing me to make sure I was hitting the books and doing well academically. So ended up graduating, was accepted into Teach for America, where, as you mentioned, I taught special education in Harlem for 2 years. After TFA, I became a recruiter for a growing charter school organization where I taught. Spent about 10 years doing that, just really developing as a recruiter, and really just as a leader in that organization. That's where I really learned just how much I love recruiting, how much I love talking to people. Just really developed a passion for just really helping people find the right opportunities where they can have the most impact. And I also just love helping organizations achieve their missions and advance their equity work through helping them just find the right people and putting them in the right seats to drive the work. So, I'm now, as you said, I'm an associate partner here at Edgility, where I've been over the last 2 years. And I'm just loving every minute of it.
That's awesome. So what I love about your work and how you set that up is some folks might listen to that and say, oh, you're a little bit of a matchmaker, right? But the way you go about your work is so much deeper than that, as you are bringing DEI and the values of agility and your own personal values into this work every day. What feels different about the way you do it at Edgility than maybe a lot of other recruiters, take on this work?
We try to be really laser focused on making sure that we're building out equitable hiring practices and selection processes with our clients. So, we believe that having an objective selection process, along with being really intentional about building in space to allow us to challenge biases and assumptions that come up in the processes. Really allow for folks that have historically experienced structural racism, discrimination, allow them to have a real equitable, fair shot at some of these leadership positions. And by the way, we're a lot of our clients are serving underserved students, families, people from underserved communities, Black and brown folks, right? And so it's really important to us and to me personally to make sure that we are doing everything we can to move the needle and seeing to it that more people that look like the communities they serve are serving in leadership positions in those organizations.
You started with this incredible story about you and your upbringing. And I'd love you to tell me some more stories. I'd love to hear a story or two about what equitable hiring practices looks like when it's done well. And maybe if you have a story or two of what it looks like when it's not done so well.
I think first of all, let's just share sort of how we think about hiring and kind of walk you through our process.
Yeah, good.
I've actually been influenced by this great book about recruiting, which I ask every one of my team to read. It's called Who. It's by these guys, a guy named Jeff Smart and Randy Street of this company called GH Smart. I recently was able to work closely with one of their partners on a big CEO search we just ran. So it's really cool for me having, at the very early stages of my career, someone gave me this book, and it's really sort of how a really important tool that I've used to just build out my process and how we build equitable hiring processes. So I've pretty much used that framework for hiring since I was introduced to the book early in my career.
And I've seen it behind you. I know we're in a different spot today, but I have seen it. It caught my eye.
Yeah, it's always right there. So we start, with engaging key stakeholders. So hiring manager, board members, direct reports, staff, families when applicable. We do a lot of schools with searches with schools, really just to learn about the strengths, areas of growth of the organization, and about what a person in the role of a search we're working on needs to accomplish in a role. So we take all those learnings, put them together in a scorecard, which includes a role mission, measurable outcomes. What does this person need to accomplish, and the most important competencies someone needs to have in order to achieve those outcomes. Once that's all set, job description's ready to go. We start the sourcing process, sourcing potential candidates we think have the experience we're looking for. Also connectors as well, right? So a big part of our work, the piece that I love most really is the recruitment work, right? The roles we're working on, helping organizations fill. The people we want aren't looking for jobs, right? You have to go find them, right? So this is why kind of where my experience as a basketball player who was being recruited by a bunch of schools, really influences how I think, right? Like you got to go find folks. Like folks don't come, like the best basketball players in the country don't apply to Duke. Like Coach K, now Coach Shire goes and finds them, right? So that's how we approach it. Once we have somebody that is interested in a conversation, we take them through a number of conversations, and this is sort of mapped to how Who lays it out. But we first have a cultivation call just to learn about their interests, check to see if the salary range works with them. We want to make sure we check on that from the start, so we don't get down the road and have that be misaligned at the end. And just try to make sure it makes sense, right? It's the right time, it's the right opportunity, it's the right location, if it's an in-person job, so on and so forth. Next, this isn't part of the Who process, but I thought it was, I wanted to bring it up just because it's something we've been talking about internally. But we typically, we've have folks, depending on the search, not for every search, but do a video interview, a one-way video interview. We send questions, candidates can record their answers in real time. We've gotten sort of mixed feedback, right? That's a place where bias is definitely, can creep into the process, right? You're watching a video, you're watching a person, you can see what they look like,
right,
sound like, et cetera, right? And so, we're just we're having a conversation internally about whether or not we want to continue using that stuff. Clients like it because clients love being able to see the candidates early in the process. But ultimately, personally, I think the downsides of it, I think probably outweigh the benefits. Yeah. After that step, we do a structured phone interview where we focus on the candidate's experience, right? So we are very focused on what folks have done for each relevant role to the opportunity. What were you hired to do? What did you accomplish? What did you achieve? What challenges you face? The challenges question, right, is a place where I like to really push people on, just because your resume, you're not often, I mean, no one's putting the challenges and hiccups they faced on their resume, right? And so really trying to understand things that people had to overcome in order to achieve the outcomes they did in a role. And then also just about learning about the team, who they worked with, what their experience was with those folks as well. We use all that information. We kind of use it as a running record, right? So every conversation we have with a candidate, we're recording it in our scorecard document. We're rating folks on the different competencies that the hiring manager or search committee is looking for, and then ultimately, sharing a recommendation with the committee to allow them to ultimately make a decision on whether or not they'd like to move forward with somebody.
How much so it sounds like you spend a lot of time talking with the candidates, right? Like learning who they are and what they would bring to the organization. How much are you learning at the outset about the organization? Because if you're presenting someone, particularly someone as you said, right, if you're thinking about someone who may become a minority inside this organization, how much work you're doing with the organization to say, is there going to be a culture add here?
Yeah. So on the front end of a search process, we call it our discovery process, right? But we are talking to staff, we're talking to other leaders, we're talking to board members, really any key stakeholder that can help give us insight into what's going well, what the organization needs to work on. One of those questions, depending on who we're talking to in the group and who we think has, who we think's closest to this work, is like, sort of, where is the organization on their equity journey? Like, what does DEI look like? What kind of training and development is being provided? Right. And, we learn a lot from those conversations, and like, it just really helps us to understand sort of where the organization is, because we want to be, as honest as we can, right, with candidates about where an organization is on its DEI journey, and what that means for them, so that they ultimately can make a good decision for them.
Let's go back to the basics in some of this process. Are you helping to craft the job description?
Yeah, so that discovery process, all those conversations, those lead to the job descriptions. So the job description and the scorecard get created sort of, hand in hand. The job description, is more of a marketing document, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, job descriptions are, we try to be detailed. We're trying to list the core responsibilities in them as best we can, and share information about the organization. But ultimately, the scorecard is like really the sort of the document that has the detail and gets into the nitty gritty, so that whoever's doing the evaluation, in addition to us, whether it's a hiring manager or a committee, is really on the same page. And so the scorecard, it's not something like we would share with candidates necessarily. Yeah, but some elements of the scorecard do end up on the JD.
So the fact that you're writing that, I suspect this may not always be applicable, but I've had this on my mind because I've been doing a lot of reading and learning about coded language and how the words we use matter, and they portray many times our values. And so I'm thinking about this phrase that often shows up in job descriptions. We are a competitive, fast-paced environment. And what maybe is being told behind a phrase like competitive, fast-paced environment? Are you, I want to get your take on that phrase, and if you're using that phrase, but how you are ever coaching clients on making sure they're clear in their language.
Yeah, that's a good one. Competitive, fast-paced environment. We just try to really be critical about the language you're using in job descriptions, right? Making sure that it is as unbiased as possible, that it's not insinuating any sort of like gender bias or anything like that. There's a million ways you can say different things that have different kinds of meanings, and so we just really just try to be critical about the language you're using and keep them as equitable and inclusive,
Yeah, thank you.
as inclusive as possible.
I'm going to prompt you to tell me another story if you've got one, right? If there's a project you've been working on recently, or if there's something over the course of your time in agility that you've been really proud of as you've seen an organization move along that equity journey. Folks who are listening are all along that journey, right? Some folks are still waiting early on in the process. Some folks are very far advanced and setting a tone for what equity looks like inside organizations. And so for folks along that journey, I'm curious to hear a little more from you on what some of those best practices do look like.
The way it comes up for me, for the most part, is in the hiring process. So as we are working with search committees, when we're doing a search, at some point before we actually start having the committee engage with candidates, we have them do what we call our equity and selection session, really to just norm and talk about and like really just have a conversation, right? Like I think sometimes it's just more important just to talk about stuff and get stuff on the table than the actual content, right? And so we do that session to review some of the common biases that come up as we've experienced them. So, for example, like affinity bias, right? We all like people that went to the same school as us or something like that, or confirmation bias, right? Where you've sort of made a decision early on and you only sort of are acknowledging or seeking out information to confirm sort of what you already thought, like, oh, this person worked at this company, so they must be great. So I'm only going to, seek evidence or listen to evidence that confirms that. Another one we see that's pretty common, especially in committees, is what's called the bandwagon effect, right? And so one thing we ask, especially if there's a hiring manager involved or an ED or CEO of an organization, we sort of proactively ask that person to sort of hold their thoughts when we're debriefing candidate interviews so that they don't bias other folks on the team. Of course, people are free to change their mind as they hear more and more perspectives. But sometimes it's easy sometimes to just want to go with the flow, right? It's like, our leader already likes this person, so I'm not gonna speak up. I'm just gonna go with it, right? And so just trying to avoid that, having those conversations. Our goal with all this is to create the expectation and the conditions for collective responsibility for equity in our search process, right? So it's on us, right, as facilitators of the process, but it's also on the committee and the organization, right? And so we try to be really brave about surfacing any issues that come up. We're just again trying to create conditions for bias to be discussed and for the issues to be surfaced so we can address them, so ultimately it doesn't negatively impact any candidate going through the process.
I imagine this is such an interesting time to be a recruiter, and particularly the kind of recruiter that you all are as you're thinking about the kind of positions that you're working to fill. When I zoom out and think about the kind of conversations I see happening across workforce development and otherwise, right? Issues of salary transparency, issues of in many cases, this is the ship has sailed, but removing background checks, issues of removing a 4-year degree requirement and being more open to different pathways to career. And so I'm curious which of those or others you see as top of mind these days that people really have their attention, right? Whether it's one of those topics or another.
I mean, salary transparency, I think, is, you're seeing it more and more across the country. Laws actually put in place where you have to publish a salary range, right? Which I think is great. This is not my focus at Edgility, but we do we also do focus on just compensation design. So we help organizations, which is just compensation strategy design. A lot of times right sizing compensation, right? And so doing a whole we call it an equity audit, right? Where we're looking at just salaries and raises and are you paying different groups are you treating different groups from a compensation perspective differently than others? A lot of times the answer is yes, right? And so there's a lot of organizations that are really just now starting to like really dive into that work and really and try to fix it, right? And so every organization is different budgets, different parameters, right? And so I think our team over there just does a really great job of helping organizations figure that out. But on the search side, right, just really, like I said earlier, we want to be transparent upfront. This is what the salary range is. Does that work for you? It often helps us, if it's not like, if the people that we are targeting are coming back and telling us, hey, that's not going to work, right? And we can take it back to our clients and let them know, right? And so, that could prompt another conversation about, if we want to get the talent that we desire for this role, like maybe we have to reconsider the salary. A lot of organizations come to Agility because, we have a really good track record of placing diverse candidates, right? Often organizations haven't done the work and they don't have the conditions internally to support that candidate, right, to be successful, right? And so that's another issue that comes up.
I'm going to ask you to finish this sentence. And we're coming to the end. So I've only got another question or two for you. But if you were to finish this sentence, if you want to be ahead of your peers in inclusive hiring, you need to fill in the blank.
You gotta be genuinely committed to it, right? So, and I think that means, right, like just doing it. Like, a lot of people, a lot of question I will get, like, how do you build diverse candidate pools, right? How do you find these candidates? Like, you just go find them, right? So, like, I think part of it's like making sure your team's diverse, right? So that their networks that they're tapping into are diverse, right? And so, sometimes you might need, you might need to look at your team, and then just, see what the reality is. And, if you're not diverse, right? Like, you're not going to attract diverse.
And that's a really important point, Jonathan, because I think it's this circle that some folks can't figure out of, well, we're not diverse now, so where do we start? And how do we make that first hire? And how will that ultimately lead to a diverse team? That takes time. But you mentioned earlier, you've got to do the internal work first.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's where it starts. And then, you got to just go find the folks, right? So it's not just, you don't just post a job somewhere and kind of hope for the best and hope people are going to come find you. You have to, if you have an internal recruitment team, or if you need to go externally and partner with somebody like us, like Agility, really just, if you're going to go external, just really being critical and asking questions about like, hey, like, what is your track record? Like, what percentage of your candidates who advance to a finalist round are candidates of color? How many, what percentage are women, right? Or non-male? Like, asking those kind of questions, I think are going to be important.
Yeah, that's super. So we mentioned earlier this phrase, competitive, fast-paced environment. I will raise my hand and say, I used to use this phrase. And we learned with some good guidance that is very much coded language for a male-dominant workplace, right? That many women will see that and just naturally step away from it. There's another one I want to get your take on, and it's culture fit.
We often will see, especially with like folks who are coming into the hiring process later, maybe we've gotten to a finalist round and we're bringing, other team members in to engage with candidates. Like, that'll be one of the that'll be one of the pushbacks, or the comments like, hey, we don't think this person's a culture fit with us, right? Like, what does that mean, right? Like, and so that's why, when we're building out our processes, we're doing the equity and selection, like anti-bias session, we're really trying to base things in evidence, right? So if someone does say that, like, well, what do you mean? What specifically, what about their experience? What did you hear that leads you to believe that, right? I think it's an org by org thing. Every org has a different culture, but often you're right. Like, people will use that to sort of exclude people with this very sort of vague, ambiguous thing that's like not really clear. So I would say, back to the conversation about sort of what orgs need to do, like, that's part of the work, right? Like, if you don't have a clear, defined culture, right? And again, every org is going to be different. There's going to be different aspects to it, but you really got to get clear on what that looks like, because that's ultimately going to help sell your organization and attract people to it.
Yeah. That's such an important reminder, and I'm going to just reinforce it here and make sure that it shows up in the show notes too. That you've really got to get clear as an organization. And what I'm hearing from you is clear on what you stand for, clear on if you really believe in inclusivity to do the work you need to do to prove it, right? It's easy to say those words. It's a lot harder to live those words. And I think that's what you and the Edgility team do so well. You are really coaches and guides along this process with your clients, and the folks that you are helping to recruit to make sure that you're making those matches and helping folks thrive. What's got you feeling inspired, hopeful, or wherever you want to go on that question as we wrap up today?
I mean, we've gotten so much positive feedback about our equity and selection. That's often cited as sort of like one of the things that our clients liked the most, or that they got the most out of during the process. Some have asked us to come back and do the session, lead that session with like all of their hiring managers in their organization. This just tells me that there's a real desire out there among organizations to have hard conversations around bias, and ultimately to build the structures that allow for more equitable and inclusive hiring.
What an awesome pleasure to chat with you, Jonathan, today, and to learn from you and to hear your backstory, how you were a basketball player and the recruitment process that you experienced and how you translate that to your work. This was a great conversation, and I so appreciate you joining us. Any final thoughts before we go, or anything you'd like to direct folks to as they're listening if they want to learn more?
I would just really encourage folks to think about succession planning, right? So if you're talking to me, or if you're talking to Edgility about a key leadership role when the need is imminent, I would call imminent like you need somebody in the next 6 months, or I could even argue a year. It's too late. Like, you really need to be talking to me, and really thinking about this at least 2 years in advance, right? If you don't know, if you don't have a timeline, if you haven't had a conversation with your leaders about succession planning, like, you need to have it. If you're a leader or a board member, you need to be thinking about and preparing for potential leadership transitions ASAP, right? So you should be conducting an internal needs assessment. You need to know where all your leaders are. If you have the time and capacity or a partner to help you with it, ideally everyone in your org. If someone leaves, who's their backup? If is that person ready? If not, what skill gaps do they need to fill? So these are things that Edgility can absolutely support you with. These are things that I love supporting organizations with. So please come find us.
Cool. And we'll leave it there. If you need a partner in the process, Edgility can be that partner. Well, Jonathan, thanks again. Great conversation today, and look forward to continuing to follow your work.
Thank you, Carrie. Thanks for having me.
Today's show is brought to you by Edgility Consulting, your compass for building equitable organizations where all staff thrive. Their talent management experts empower you to break free from traditional hiring, compensation, and talent management norms that often perpetuate inequality and prevent you from hiring and retaining great staff. Put your values to work. Act on equity. Visit edgilityconsulting.com. That's EDGILITY, edgilityconsulting.com, and talk to a consultant about upgrading your talent systems to attract and retain top talent and ensure equity at your organization today.